Okay.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the discussion session for September 28th, 2022. I will give my apologies for not being in person, but COVID is ravaging the family. So out of an abundance of caution, I am staying home and safe, and Commissioner Grella is unavailable this evening. So we are a quorum of 3 this evening. So with that, we will jump right in to our busy agenda this evening with item number 1. Manager McGill, please, will you review the agenda and meeting items?
Yes, Mr. President. Tonight's regular agenda, we have the introduction of an ordinance increasing the stormwater fee and extending the effective date of the ordinance. We had a fairly long conversation about that over several discussion sessions. So this is the introduction of that ordinance. We also have the consideration of the award for a contract for a study of the south garage structure. This is an engineering study to try to determine the approximate remaining life of that structure. We have the consideration to award a contract for the recreation center roof. And then finally, we have the consideration for the purchase of automatic external defibrillators, AEDs, to replace 29 units. Those would be for fire, police, and public access use.
All right, thank you very much, Manager McGill. Item number 2 on the agenda, I know is one that has been long coming and many people are interested in, is the Arden traffic calming. We have Mr. Haberman of Gateway, who will be presenting to us this evening. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm here. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this works.
Mr. Flynn, can you hear us okay?
I can, thank you.
Okay, so Commissioner Flynn, Commissioner Silverman, and Commissioner Rainey have hard copies of this as well. They're looking at the same thing you are. Commissioner Rainey's very familiar with what we've gone through procedurally on this, as this is her ward, but I'll just touch briefly for your sake and for Commissioner Silverman's sake. This process actually started not long before COVID. The neighborhood did a screening and with a petition and qualified for moving forward with a neighborhood traffic calming plan. COVID then hit, and we were in a position where we had to wait to be able to collect some of the data that we needed to analyze to come up with a plan.
Because we were concerned, is it okay if I come?
Sure.
We were concerned that the traffic patterns would be reflective of accurate traffic patterns.
Specifically, the volumes were going to be lower than they would have been otherwise. So we did begin moving forward here earlier this year and in the spring. From the process standpoint, we collected all that data, did an alternatives analysis.
Turn your speaker off. Or that.
So that's all I have. We did have a special neighborhood meeting, a separate meeting with the neighborhood to review the alternatives. We actually came out of that initial meeting with a neighborhood consensus on the plan that we came up with. That plan was then presented to the traffic board, who also liked the plan and recommended moving forward with that plan. So we're now in front of the commission to discuss the plan, discuss next steps, discuss what your options are, talk a little bit about each of the treatments that we're proposing between Beverly and Cochrane along this neighborhood, Arden Road neighborhood, answer your questions, get some feedback, and then hopefully this can end up on a regular meeting agenda in the near coming months so that the plan moving forward can be voted on by the commission.
And I know, Mike, you've met with Rudy from Works. You obviously met with the manager and planner on this, but I don't know if you've had a chance to run it through public safety yet since you and I talked.
We did.
Okay.
I did hear back from, I think it was the assistant fire chief.
Yes.
He had a couple of questions. I clarified some things for him. In general, was comfortable with what we were proposing.
Okay.
There were some changes, Commissioner Flynn and Commissioner Silverman, from what we originally presented conceptually to the traffic board. The theory behind each is still the same, but there were some changes as a result of some of the ability that Rudy had concerns with some of the salt trucks and plows. dump trucks that get through there. We had some concerns with some of the movements from the largest fire truck that Mount Lebanon has, not being able to navigate some things. So what you're going to see tonight is, in concept, is the same idea and the same theory, but there are some changes geometrically and some changes to materials that we have made to try to ease some of those concerns by some of those agencies.
Okay. So it's a little different from what the residents saw a couple months ago. Correct. And even the traffic board. So it's been revised with every kind
Correct.
Of with some more input, and hopefully now we have something that works for everyone theoretically.
and I guess I'll start with, so we're treating this neighborhood, and as I told the neighbors in the meeting and the traffic board, essentially runs from Beverly to Cochrane and vice versa. Everybody knows that it's used as a cut through to avoid Beverly and the lights on Beverly and probably the schools, depending on the time of day that are along there. So the volume thresholds actually were met for this neighborhood. So even though some of these measures we're proposing are going to slow traffic down, they're also going to have the result of hopefully diverting some of the traffic. Because what we're trying to do is create enough of an impediment along the way that some folks, hopefully 12% of people that are using this as a cut through will say there's too many impediments and they'll stay on the roads we want them to stay on. So each of these in series hopefully has a cumulative effect that we're looking for. 1, 2, 3, 4, however many we decide on will certainly have impacts on volumes and speeds. It's just that, that level of benefit or level of impact, if you will, is going to depend on, I think all of these things being done in series. So I'll start at the Beverly Road intersection, Beverly Arden Road intersection. This first exhibit is just what's out there now. That's the existing condition. One of the phenomena here, and that the residents that live down at the bottom have issue with backing out of the driveways, is that if you're coming from the city, so you're coming from McFarland, where my hand is here, and you make this right turn, Arden comes in at such an angle that you're almost not really making a right turn. And they're can come around there probably 18 to 20 miles per hour as opposed to 9 to 10 miles per hour, which is what right turns are typically made at. So the first in the series of the treatments that we're proposing, as you'll see on the second page here, is essentially taking that wide area and that angle and redoing that curve. I'll liken it a little bit to what we did at Hoodridge and Rockwood a couple of years back, not to that extent, because that was a pretty significant radius that we removed there, but similar to the point where if you're coming down Beverly, turning onto Arden, you're actually going to make a right turn into a 90-degree at the speed and the pace that we want people to do it. It's also going to shorten the length of the crossing for pedestrians in front, probably by maybe half, ultimately depending on the design. We did have this a little bit narrower and a little bit tighter originally when we met with Public Works. There were some questions and concerns about garbage trucks going straight across, plow trucks going straight across, and that they would just essentially cut over that curb like some of the other issues we saw on Sleepy Hollow a number of years back. So this version is modified. We had this just narrow 2 12-foot lanes at the bottom here. We've added some feet to that so that right at the throat here it's a little bit wider, but it's still creating that need for a right turn. You see at the top, this is the priciest of all because there's some sidewalk, driveway extension, curb, some removal of some things, a little bit of pavement along the edge there. Where our opinion of probable cost on this one is $65,000. If I look back at the one that was done at Hoodridge and Rockwood, I believe that one was about $65,000 to $70,000. Also included some brick restoration, but it was also 3-4 years ago, and as we know, costs are way up. So that's kind of an all-in. That's we'd have to get some survey out here and actually do some design. So there's a little bit of engineering and survey fee in there as well. This next exhibit.
And that would be owned by the resident, right? I mean, not owned, it's in the right of way, but the resident would maintain that.
Correct.
Piece.
So essentially for the most part throughout the municipality, the sidewalks that are adjacent to the streets in front of the houses are actually in Mount Lebanon's right of way, but just like every other case, it's the homeowner's opportunity or responsibility to shovel their sidewalk and to maintain it. As was the case with Hoodridge and Rockwood, the colonel, I think, was it colonel or general? Colonel, that's on the corner there. He liked having the bigger yard to maintain, and It looked at as a benefit for him, but essentially a lot of that is in the right of way, in the Mount Lebanon right of way. So yeah,
I hope this property owner enjoys shoveling horses. Driveway.
yeah. But so so from a dollar standpoint, that's the highest. That's also maybe the trickiest because of those types of things where, you know, you're gonna have more driveway, more area to maintain for this homeowner. We have not discussed anything with that homeowner. That wouldn't, I think, happen until something moves, gets planned to move forward. I do have some other exhibits that I'm not going to scroll through in my presentation, but they're in your hard copy packet, essentially just showing the fire truck movements, garbage truck movements going straight across. Showing how those movements can be made and how that can work with this change in geometry. So we proceed west on Arden up the hill. We get through the all-way stop sign with North Meadowcroft. And then we get to this section, which you should obviously know where this is. It's like mid-block between Overlook and the next one. So
Particularly including the house numbers, really.
yeah, this really spells it out for you. It's like putting a puzzle together. But it's actually in front of right around 287 Arden Road. So this is just your standard speed hump that you've seen in other places throughout the municipality that's being installed. Typical hump, it's 12 feet long, it's a parabola, it's not a bump like you would see in a parking lot at a mall. You can travel about 15 miles per hour over them comfortably. They're marked with signs and pavement markings. We have to find areas where we've got roadway grades less than 8%, which we have here. Okay. You want it to be not in front of somebody's driveway, which with the driveways on each side, the spacing, we had to find a location where we weren't going to be impacting people's driveways, and then so that the drainage would work. So this was a real good spot for it. This was the location that was presented to the traffic board and to the neighborhood. That didn't really have any comments as far as the location. They were all pretty good, but it's pretty much midway between those two blocks. So if you follow me from the beginning, we're slowing you down on the right turn, making that a little bit more uncomfortable for you.
Then you try to gun it. And
yeah.
Then you got the speed hump.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Then you speed up and then you slow down at the speed hump, then you speed up again. That takes us to this kind of offset Overlook Drive Arden intersection. It might not be coming through on here in the existing conditions, but the alignment of it and the width internally between here is about 30 feet wide curb to curb. Once you get down further to the south towards the business district, it's your standard 22 or 24 foot wide. Same thing when you get up to the north. So there's actually a little bit of a skew in here on Overlook. It's not a straight through shot, and it's pretty wide in between these two crosswalks, and curb to curb is about 30 feet. This isn't always stop, but the stop signs are on the outsides. So if you're coming northbound on Overlook and you stop and you want to continue straight through, when you get to the northern side of Arden, you don't have another stop sign there. You're essentially navigating through the intersection. Same thing if you're using Arden as that cut through, you would have to kind of do a little bit of a jog through the intersection there. This is manned with a crossing guard, person with a crossing guard. During school hours, covered by a crossing guard. My understanding is that the crossing happens in the middle here, so kind of in that middle no man's land where you don't have a stop sign once you're in the intersection. But essentially it's worked well. But this isn't a marked crossing, but that's where the crossing takes place. This is one of the ones that we did a pretty significant modification to from the plan that was presented to the traffic board in the neighborhood. We were originally trying to put in a little bit of a concrete island in the middle as a little bit of a refuge area to take up some of that wide space in the middle there, and to delineate, to force more of a left turn and a right turn. Because what happens, and when we saw on the video and the data collection and some of the concerns, is that the people were coming up, kind of rolling through the stop sign at an angle and then shooting straight across at a 45-degree and vice versa. So they're not really making turns or making the movements, and it's in an area that's pretty heavily traveled with pedestrians, especially students. And they're again, they're trying to avoid the lights on Beverly, and they're trying to get from Cochrane to Beverly or vice versa. So they're taking every shortcut they can. We're trying to impede them a little bit and calm them.
And this is close to a business district. I know most of you know that.
Yeah.
Beverly's right there. So.
Business district just to the south of the screen here. So instead of that, what we're proposing is to essentially create the same thing with markings, yellow markings, white markings, piano key crosswalk markings, dash double line markings. So if you're in a vehicle, you know, visually you're going to see where those dash double yellow lines take you. You're gonna, you know, ideally you're gonna follow that. If you think about other areas where you have lots of asphalt and pavement, but you have pavement markings, you don't typically see people just cruising right through the middle of pavement markings. I mean, they typically like to follow the lines that are on the road for them. So while we won't physically be able to restrict them here because of some of the issues with plowing and with the fire truck being able to maybe make that maneuver, we're still, you know, in theory, creating the same calming effect that we wanted to have and that the neighborhood had seen. So that would all be pavement markings. We would like it to be thermoplastic so that it lasts longer and that it, you know, it's a little more clear and visible. So, you know, that could probably be outsourced. We're estimating for about $7,500. There's not really any other signage. One of the other things is the possibility, if you have them or can get them, I know they get destroyed, but kind of at the nose of each one of these, the little Bigfoot panels that have the yield the pedestrian and crosswalk, that's just another impediment for a motorist who maybe wants to drive through the middle of these markings. Those are the kind of things that I think we can do out here relatively inexpensively. So now you've hit the right turn, slow them down with the speed hump, slow them down through this intersection and with these turns. And then now this is Marlin Drive East in Arden, existing condition there. We're just proposing another speed hump here, same idea, 12-foot wide, a rolling speed hump. You can certainly travel over them comfortably at 15 miles per hour. An annoyance, yes, just another impediment along the way we're trying to create. This particular one, between this one and the next one, so this one is at, well, it's right near the intersection. But the next one, we're showing kind of just before it turns to brick, so between Marlin Drive West and McCann. This one is a little bit more desirable. There was discussion at the traffic board and with the neighborhood about whether both of these were necessary or needed in series. I think one resident was in support of one, but didn't really want the other one in front of their house. So we kind of left it at, it'll be one or the other or both.
Okay.
So that's kind of an unknown at this point. This is the one I think that makes the most sense. It's in a better spot with the vertical grade on this section of Arden. The other one that's up towards Marlin Drive East is a little bit steeper. It might be pushing at 8% or 8% threshold that we kind of want to stay away from. We don't want to create a launch for people who are maybe unfamiliar with it. It also would grab anybody who was coming up our Marlin Drive East or West to head down towards Cochrane. We're going to kind of capture both of them with this one. So this one is, if we had to have one or the other, this is the one I would recommend. But that's not to say that, you know, the neighborhood would have liked to see both, but they'd also be okay with one, and I think this would be the one.
So you designed and priced out 3 total speed bumps as part of the traffic calming.
Correct.
And you're saying if you had to do 2, you'd pick this one and the first one you showed us.
Correct.
Or we could do all 3.
Or you could do all 3.
Thanks. Yep. I saw that there was just an accident at Arden Drive West.
Yeah,
Marlin West and Arden, sorry.
Yeah, I saw some of those too. So this one here would be, obviously you can see it's right before the brick section. There would be a little bit of pavement marking on there that, you know, obviously would probably wear, but we'd be able to have them up on the hump and signs without really any issue there. And then this is the intersection of McCann and Arden. This is all brick. That dark circle is not supposed to show up on there yet, but it's an all-way stop control. And this particular intersection is a big intersection as well. It's got relatively large radii on both sides. The road's a little bit wider than maybe, you know, the 22 or 24 feet. So you kind of have a big area in the middle here. So one of the treatments that's at our disposal is a traffic circle, not a roundabout, a little bit different. You know, roundabout you're coming into without stop signs and you're kind of entering and flowing out of it at your own pace. This particular intersection is already an all-way stop controlled intersection, but it's very wide. So what we're proposing and what the neighborhood like the idea of is another little impediment internal to the intersection, so that anyone who is coming up on any of the approaches would have to, you know, kind of S around it to continue straight or loop around it to go south. Again, it's another 3, 4, 5 seconds, hopefully, that we're adding to somebody's cut through between the two roads that might force them or cause them to stay out on Beverly. In PennDOT's criteria and guidelines, they say you should have at least 16 feet between curbs on these four corners. That's what we started with. So this is one of the adjustments that we made based on conversations with Rudy and issues with potentially plowing and then being able to get a fire truck through here. So we shrunk the circle a little bit. It would be landscaped. We would propose the rolled curbs that you see throughout the municipality on the outside. So there is still even a little bit more room there with the rolled curbs for a tire of a fire truck or something that had to go over. The neighborhood says that they would maintain the middle of it and have a flower planting party once a year in the middle. It wouldn't be any high shrubbery or anything that would cause any sightline issues. It's really just another visual and physical impediment at an intersection that has a lot of space for it. So we've estimated that cost at about $30,000. Basically just some curb and some brick restoration is really all that's included in that, and maybe a couple of signs. I did show examples. I don't have them here, but I showed some examples throughout the way to the traffic board and to the neighborhood of very similar intersections with landscape traffic circles in Upper St. Clair. There's three of those that I pulled up onto the screen and showed everybody just to give them an idea. You know, when they see it, they go, "Oh yeah, okay, that's not this huge impediment," but it's, you know, it's kind of it's attractive, but it's also a little bit of a calming device. And those other ones that I did show in Upper St. Clair were at intersections where only two of the streets were stopped and the other streets, you know, kind of flowed through it free and had to go around it. This particular case, from a safety standpoint, is probably a little better because everyone that's coming up to this intersection has to stop. So you're not going to have free flowing traffic that's, you know, coming down Arden Road and maybe someone doesn't realize it's here and now we're launching somebody over a flower bed. So it's a little bit more ideal from that standpoint.
And then how would a vehicle turn left and when they approach the stop sign?
They're supposed to go 3/4 of the way around it.
Okay, like a traffic, like a roundabout kind of thing.
Yeah, but not around it. Yeah, yes, you're supposed to
go around it.
Now, are people going to come up to the stop sign and no one's going to be there? They're going to shoot straight through?
Yeah,
yes, they are.
Yeah, now that it's 19 feet, it's a little, 16 feet, I don't think you do it, but 19 feet you might do, but that's maybe learned behavior. Maybe we can add some lines.
Right, and we'll have it signed. Yeah. But we have signs leading into it. Down at the bottom here, you can see it says traffic circle with a little circle on it, and then internally you have the state of the right. So those are actually white and black, so they're regulatory. So if it really becomes problematic, you could, you know, you could set a cop there and ticket somebody for going the wrong way through the circle. I'm not saying we want to do that, but that's a possibility.
And the bricks that we removed to be saved for
Rudy gets them.
There you go.
Mike, do your turn templates for that actually show that movement?
Yeah, that's not the one that I have pulled up. I could pull it up. We have the fire truck going through there. And they're in the hard copies that you have printed out. See, let me see if I can pull it. I might have them in a different email.
Yeah, maybe we want to come back to that. It might not be right. Just what I see and what you see doesn't match.
Right.
Maybe he's in progress still.
Yeah, and again, it's more of an issue for fire, larger vehicles, you know, a moving van, somebody.
Yes. So this first one, we're showing the largest ladder truck from Mount Lebanon making the movement that we just talked about you're not supposed to make. So we assume the fire truck is going to come down and use that 19-foot space. This is all of them turning left. So they can do all of these movements within the outside area without looping around it. We're not expecting that a fire truck is going to want to go 3/4 of the way around this circle. They won't be able to, physically won't be able to. Yeah, they'll have to drive through the middle of it. And that's the left. This is the right. Again, the same exact thing. So if they're coming up McCann and wanted to turn right onto Arden, we wouldn't loop them around. We would assume that they would use that 19-foot of space in the middle there to make that movement. And then the size of the circle actually was adjusted for those through movements. And again, they're conservative. These are turning temperatures are relatively conservative. But we are showing that it's within the curbs on all the way through there, even though we are going to have a 1.5 or 2 foot wide rolled curb. So that in theory, there's even a little bit more space for tires. There's no barrier curb. That was one of the questions from the assistant fire chief. Hey, you know, we don't want to be hopping curbs. We'll have some low clearances, so it's not it's not a barrier curb situation. It's the soft rolled curb that a tire can track on. So that was the straight north and south, and then that was the east and west. So that's why it went from 16 feet to 19 feet on the outside, and the circle got a little smaller to be able to accommodate every movement that a fire truck would want to make there. Still going to be a little bit, I know, a pain from a plowing standpoint for Rude and his guys. And that's something I think the commission has to consider as well. So. And then the last but not least of the 7, I won't go through all of the 6 again. We get down to Arden and Cochrane. While this is not a significant movement, we did discuss it with the neighborhood. There are about 5% of the traffic does try to make that left turn or does make that left turn onto Cochrane from Arden, which, as you all know how congested Cochrane can be there. Probably not the safest left turn movement when cars are stacked in the through lane and in the left turn lane. And it's not a high volume. So we had talked about, just restricting those turns during the peak time. So, 7 to 9 or 6 to 9 in the morning and 4 to 6 in the afternoon on Monday through Friday. We did also discuss just making it a permanent restriction of left turns. I think the neighborhood, if I'm not mistaken, said, yeah, restricted at all times. So that's kind of still floating out there as a decision that can be made. I mean, the residents essentially said, we don't even bother trying to make that left turn. We have other ways that we would go to get down to Cochrane. So whoever is making that left turn never said they were concerned about restricting it. So this exhibit's just showing a time of day restriction, but that could be permanent if that's what everybody wants or the commission wants.
And signs are just $500, so it's not.
Yeah, it's just a couple of signs.
What's going to work best?
It's like 4 signs.
Yeah, and we did something, and then 2 years later we want to change it.
Mm-hmm. So when you take all 7 of these treatments in series, the idea was we create enough impedance and enough inconvenience for the people that are using this as a cut through to just stay on Beverly. That's the goal. Cumulatively, we're hoping for a 10 to 12% reduction in the cut through traffic or the peak traffic or whatever volume we want to capture. We've got pre-installation volumes now, so we have good data that tell us post installation if we have the effect that we wanted. That's not to say that if the commission chooses to just put 2 speed humps in, that won't have an effect. It may have an effect, and maybe it's a 2% decrease. But all of these things ideally are going to reduce some of that traffic. And for the traffic that decides to continue to use it, they'll use it calmly. So that's kind of how I explained it to the neighborhood. So this is the gateway's recommendation. Correct. And the traffic board ultimately recommended it.
And we have some money set aside in the budget for traffic calming. Where does that?
We don't have much. You've got at this point probably 25. When you net out engineering, you're probably at 20. So this would have to be supplemented with whatever you sort of the 2023 budget, or if you decided, again, I said 2023 budget because even if you said, hey, let's allocate money now and do it as part of the budget amendment process, realistically, none of this is going to get implemented until 2023. Yeah. So again, yeah, we could use money now, or we could do the current budget process. Correct. But I guess the takeaway is that we will need additional funds. Yeah. Typically, in a normal budget year, we budget anywhere between $50,000 for traffic calming, depending on what we know is out there. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, we can figure out once the commission sort of decides to move forward, we can allocate the associated funding based on Mike's estimates. And Mike, I didn't see in here, I was going to ask the question, since you've got obviously traffic counts free, would you anticipate a post study a year after the improvements are in to look at those?
So in the past, what we've done is we've only done a post study when the commission decided to do a temporary measure. They want, and that was on North Meadow property, temporary speed hump in. And then we collected some data like 6 months later. The data actually showed the decrease that we were looking for, but the neighborhood didn't really care. And the woman who really wanted everything moved, and they came out and never come back. Sleepy Hollow was permanent. there was never a post study. I think it's really at the discretion of the commission. If you want it, we can certainly collect data.
Just more money, more engineering time.
It wouldn't be engineering. I use a sub to collect data. So.
Oh, okay. That's not very expensive. That maybe it would be interesting then.
It could be.
You're comfortable that if we move 10 to 12% of the volume to stay on Beverly, we won't impact levels of service for those intersections that are signalized?
Shouldn't. People just, I think they perceive that this is quicker, but those signals are, of the highest technology, and you can move through there. Maybe at Cochrane and Beverly it gets a little bit dicey, but that's where we want them. Yeah. Okay.
So the total is 133,000. The commission was given some budget numbers, some estimates, very estimates. Just I think today, so it's not in this presentation, but the estimated total is about $133,000. Yeah. Just for anybody watching.
Yeah, it's some of the things we talked about. I don't know if this is the right place for it, but the commission's the commission has many options. You can move forward with the entire plan and fund it. You could approve the entire plan and say, well, we'll fund it when we find funding. You could approve pieces of it.
Okay.
You could phase it. You could send it back to the traffic board, which please don't. You could approve it with modifications. I mean, so there's a lot. There's a lot. Yeah, you have a lot of your discretion as far as what you want to do. One of the things that we had talked about was, hey, in your paving program next year, maybe the two speed humps become part of the paving program.
Yeah.
That way.
Well, that's I apologize. That's my question is when are these segments of road scheduled to be repaired, resurfaced, replaced? Because as I look at this and to Manager McGill's question, I frankly, I don't think that these are aggressive enough. That's my just base opinion. I frankly don't think paint saves lives. We should be much more aggressive in terms of slowing traffic. But I know that also impacts other roads in the area, and how we understand the impact of one road in a network is next to impossible without having a robust active transportation plan that's taking into account all of these factors, which I know you do a great job of. I'm not saying you're not thinking about all these factors, but and I love Rudy, no offense nor to fire, but find ways around. We really, if our primary focus is, hey, let's try to slow traffic, but let's prioritize the fire truck over the child safety, I'm concerned. I want walkability first, and let's think about large equipment that needs to move throughout a whole network, not on a intersection by intersection basis, but on a network basis. I think it's an important discussion to have, and well, I'm not going to stand in the way of this. I know this needs to get done. I will support whatever the recommendations are. I do see these as, in many respects, stopgaps that are still prioritizing car movement over pedestrian movement, when we need to be thinking in other directions.
I totally agree with you, Commissioner Flynn. I do. I would be yes, and let's do both the complete streets work and let's do this $133,000 to immediately help with the safety situation that we have in this area.
Mr. Flynn, when you said this isn't aggressive enough, what were you envisioning?
Make it one way, narrow the street, put in bollards. I'm not an expert, but I can start rattling off a list. I mean, there's all kinds of things, but it's much, in my opinion, it's much more about narrowing. Again, a speed bump, in my opinion, is a stopgap. If we want to slow people down, put barriers in the way that are going to make people actively navigate as opposed to having a straight shot. Right. There are, and I'm sure this conversation probably go into the complete streets discussion because we have people with those opinions in the room. But there are again, depending on the type of street this is, and I would argue that this is a residential street. We should treat it like a residential street where people should be able to live in that space, not avoid cars. So how do we do that, right? There are lots of really interesting patterns that are being developed for residential streets that, again, this is a long straight shot. How do we make it a not straight shot? A speed bump is just creating a bump, but keeping it a straight line. But if I have it so that, again, I have physical barriers, strategically placed on either side so people have to navigate through it, that's creating a slowed experience that is truly making it a residential street where people can walk and live and bike and play a game and not have to worry about, people driving fast. So again, this for me is a temporary step. I liked the first one, right? The bump out, that made a lot of sense to me. But again, the paint lines as opposed to the physical barrier on that one intersection, paint doesn't save lives. The traffic circle, traffic circle I like. This one. I understand, right? It creates a visual experience. I understand that. But again, if it creates a visual experience for pedestrians also. When I'm in a crosswalk, I think I'm safe, but I'm not. And this is just creating more pain. So again, it's these types of situations that I think, it's a nice step, but it's not ultimately where we want to be. But that's my opinion. And like I said, I will support this, but I hope that we will start to be more aggressive in terms of thinking about how this network actually fits together.
Well, the question, for the one you talked about, paint versus a physical barrier, I think my vague recollection of some discussion about this being some physical barrier, but there's a problem. Was it the fire truck? Was it garbage truck? What was the thing that just could make a physical barrier now?
Right.
No trucks can go through.
They wouldn't be able to make this movement.
We get 3
So they could do, they could make right turns, northbound rights, southbound rights, southbound lefts. They could do all those. They couldn't make that straight through maneuver.
I agree with you, Commissioner Flynn, with the ideology. And I also know that you don't want to piecemeal it and just look at Arden, because then we'll create a problem for Parker. If we make Arden the vision that you have, which I agree with, like I said, theoretically, then as a piecemeal project, we're going to create problems for the nearby countries. But we'll look at all the streets together holistically.
Yeah, we collected that on Parker, Arden, Beverly, and where they all connect. So we have all that. Yeah, we know what was there before anything happens.
That's perfect.
Well, honestly, again, great study. Obviously, a lot of work's gone into this. And I suspect that the commission is going to be supportive, of at least some of these, if not all of them, if I suspect correctly. So unless there are other questions on this, and I defer to Commissioner Silverman and Randy, we are over time, and I would like to move forward.
Yeah, my note is just, I'm sensitive to wanting to make sure the fire trucks on the streets. So that's where I hear what you're saying, but I don't know how to reconcile that with the other aspect of, where's the fire truck go? This is a physical barrier.
Yeah.
We're not going to solve that tonight, but that's just.
Yeah, and kind of ending the discussion here would be good for me, because I'd like some time to hear back from the residents in this area, since this is the first time that they're seeing these revised plans, on what their thoughts are, and that will kind of help guide exactly where I stand. But I'm generally very supportive and really appreciate the work of everyone involved.
Fantastic. Mr. Haberman, thank you for your work. And on behalf of the whole municipality, we appreciate all of your efforts.
Thank you.
All right, next up on the agenda, we have Mr. Mill Iron and Seth Davis of the EDC come to talk to us about complete streets. This is a streets full agenda.
Let me turn my computer audio on for him here.
So I'm glad that I was able to wake everyone up for Mike's presentation there. Apologize for that. Okay. Had it pulled up now. Just give me a moment here to.
Speaking echoes, just a minute.
No doubt. Okay, where did it go? I was looking for today. I have to join the meeting again.
Do we need to play the music or something? There we go.
No. Okay, I wanted to get that up. Sorry for the delay, Commission, and anyone watching us in the cyberland. I'm Eric Milliron, the Commercial Districts Manager, and as Commissioner Flynn mentioned, I have Seth Davis with me, who is a member of the Economic Development Council and has been a key player in pulling together the draft Complete Streets policy that we're going to take a look at this evening. A few weeks ago, I did a dive into what Complete Streets is and had that in the packets. And then as a refresh, put that in again for this past weekend, just to keep that front and center as we go through high-level elements of the policy. So just want to kind of remind folks that the Complete Streets notion really started presenting itself to us in 2013 when we did that comprehensive plan. And as we're now embarking 10 years later, or almost 10 years later, on the next comprehensive plan, we're seeing the same sort of robust response for these types of initiatives. And while the plan is not complete and there's still much to be done, at least at this particular time, it appears that Complete Streets is something, and these types of issues are things that residents would like to see. And I think just with Mike's last presentation and the residents at Arden, this is very well timed. Yes, very, very timely, I suppose. So I'll just quickly, say the Complete Streets, it's a process and then it's an approach. And that policy considers, the entire right of way, as we were just listening there, and as Commissioner Flynn was bringing further attention to, I think, in some of his points. So at the Economic Development Council, our primary focus is economics, and this is an economic issue. I'm interested in it from how it can make our business districts safer. I hear all the time, about speeding through Washington Road and Beverly. That's one of the issues that comes up time and time again. So from that perspective, I have a tremendous amount of interest in seeing how we can mitigate some of that and also offer a better experience for the consumers walking up and down those streets, so forth and so on. So at the council, we were tasked with beginning the development of the draft Complete Streets policy that we're daylighting here today. And then if Seth is agreeable, I'd like Seth to maybe just give a little background on where all these words came from that make up this policy, and then we'll go through the policy.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, commission members, and thank you, Eric, for lining this up. This really started, I joined the Economic Development Council at some point, but it had been in the works, like Eric said. And what we're modeling, like you said, of this process and approach, it doesn't come with funding. It doesn't come with all those things. It doesn't put anything into action, but it sets a process and approach for the community. And it's modeled after, these specific words are modeled after what comes from Smart Growth America and the National Complete Streets Council or Coalition. So that's why there's typically 10 sections. We've added an 11th that it has the local context, but this one specifically is modeled off the best practices from a national, regional, and local element. Complete Streets exists in over 1,500 jurisdictions as of 2020 in the United States. 1,300 cities and towns have those. There's county level, there's state level. So it isn't a new framework, but it's a new consideration. It's not even a new consideration for us because it was in the comp plan as something we should execute. But those specific words are modeled after best practice and modeled after best practice language. And what it does is it really expands our lens, and it sets, it's just a step along our path, a path we're already taking. We already do streets, we already do traffic calming, we already do all these things, but it sort of brings it under an umbrella and sets a North Star for the community. A commitment to the community and vision. By having this vision, you can say, oh, you're asking for this. Well, we're working towards that in this fashion. And it's just that first step. We'll talk about an active transportation plan. And really what that says is what Commissioner Flynn was really hampering is a network vision. Where is our fire emergency streets? The streets we will always clear first. We probably have that from a snow plowing perspective. Which streets do we hit? We already have it. So it just brings that under a network vision. So okay, we can't touch this street the same way because it is our emergency access street. It is our priority snow plowing street. It is X, Y, Z, and it brings it under an umbrella so we can work towards it. And that's kind of the setup for this portion. But yeah, this has been benchmarked against other policies locally. We took it to the Environmental Sustainability Board, the Mount Lebanon Partnership. We had several committees within EDC that have workshopped this and gone back and forth and also shared it throughout the community. And I believe Eric has taken it through the chain of command here within the municipality as well. So
right, we've even had the Historic Preservation Board take a look at some of the language. So really trying to get a thorough review of the policy statement. So what I was thinking of doing is, this is a policy, so there's a lot of sections and subsections. As you can see, there's a lot of 1.1s, and it goes on from there. So what I thought would be good is highlight a couple of pieces in the sections that give the spirit of the section, and then turn this document loose, unleash it onto the commission for deeper analysis and review. And then once I go through this, we'll take some time to talk about next steps and the active transportation plan that Seth and Commissioner Flynn referenced. Okay, so I already mentioned that Complete Streets policy, does consider the entire right of way. So that's, I'm not going to read the whole definition, but that's the nugget. That we really are looking holistically at right-of-way and movement of all mobility types. Vision and intent, again, this is creating an economical and functional equity to every user on the road, every household, regardless of one's income, place of residence, neighborhood, and mode choice, and other factors. So point being, not everybody has the ability or the desire to have a car. Some may wish to use a scooter. Some may wish to use a bike. Some may just simply want to use their Nikes or Keds. So, this is considering all of that, and in that respect does create an economical equity in the transportation realm. Diverse users, again, getting back to that, Complete Streets really takes the concept of ADA and does what we strive to do, and in many ways have accomplished with Vibrant Uptown, or will once it's complete. And moving forward with the second phase of that or any other phase, how are we considering ADA issues above and beyond just the baseline? But it's not just about folks with disabilities. That is for folks that are elderly, those with young kids, strollers, all of those things. So all these audiences are taken into account when looking at diverse use. Okay. Commitment in all projects and phases is the third section. And this is where I wanted to pull out the municipality would foster partnerships with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I want to pause there because a complete streets policy, should the municipality adopt one, compels PennDOT to consider the fact that the municipality considers these issues of high importance. So when they come through, Route 19, a complete streets policy gives us a tool to work with PennDOT for considerations that are best for Mount Lebanon. So we can really join in partnership with the Commonwealth, but also Allegheny County. Allegheny County has made some bold efforts at moving forward this type of thinking and policy work. Then our neighboring communities, Dormont right now is actively pursuing something very similar. And they're doing some test pilot projects throughout their municipality in ways of, traffic calming and making sure people are considerate of other modes. So, there's real opportunity for us to work not just with the Commonwealth and Allegheny County, but maybe even more importantly with our next door neighbors, Dormont, Castle Shannon, and so forth. Exceptions. We just had a little bit of that conversation. I don't want to delve back too much into that, but there are many considerations, and obviously public safety, costs, all of these things ought to be and need to be considered in any policy. So, exceptions offer an opportunity for that pause, if you will, while considering various projects. Jurisdiction, obviously it's Mount Lebanon, but again, this is just an opportunity for us to work obviously within our 6 square miles, but there's a lot of opportunities working with, again, our neighbors, the county, the Commonwealth, and the federal government, all of which are committed to complete streets throughout the region. So this addresses that. I won't get too much into design, but it's in there basically to say we're using best state-of-the-art practices and drawing from the cream of the crop, if you will, of thinking when it comes to complete streets.
I'll touch on the design just
please,
just a little bit. What it does is it expands our toolbox. I mean, we have PennDOT has a lot of guidance and they've come a long way. But these documents show some interim steps. We kind of talked about stopgap on Arden Road. Not a stopgap, but maybe it's an interim step. Hey, let's see how this works. Or you consider rather than a concrete curb, there's companies, Zikla is one company that makes kind of a rubber curb, and you can do some temporary installation to see how it works, see how the fire trucks run over it, see how our plows treat it. We've done temporary installations in North Meadowcroft, but a lot of this documentation shows some of those iterative steps, and you can study something, see how it responds. You don't get locked into concrete and other curbing right away while you see how it works out for the community, our DPW, or other groups within the municipality. So a lot of this documentation points you in that direction.
Could you do a temporary traffic circle?
Yeah. I mean, I
Really?
can't specifically,
I know.
but we can. Yeah, we can do something.
Yeah.
we're not gonna get do guerrilla roundabouts.
Not that I haven't thought of it. But.
I have thought.
So, but also in design is, it's not just, I'm talking because I think it's the easiest to communicate in a limited amount of time. But, there's also stormwater issues that can be addressed, so just dialing back very quickly to design. The very last bullet point there is the EPA recommended low impact development methods. And, this concept, which is a lot to get into, but I'll say this, is gaining some traction. And one of the core members of our team working on the policy wanted to make sure that we had at least some language in there discussing low impact development methods as a way of mitigating stormwater issues, which we're all, unfortunately too aware of. Land use and context sensitivity. again, I can read it here, but it's, taking a look at solutions that are in the context of our community. So, the comprehensive plan is one of those, but we also have the Parks Master Plan. Again, Complete Streets is looking at the entirety of the municipality and how people get from point A to point B in the best possible way. So looking at all of those various plans, and then we're going to be talking about an active transportation plan. We don't have one, but should we take this step, that would be more than likely the next step, but we'll talk about that in a second. Like any good policy that's really trying to actually do something, you would want to have some performance measures. So there's a number of them here. I highlighted ones that we're either actively pursuing. A lot of these things we do. Some of these things we do, a lot of them we do. But I know right now we're in the midst of installing and considering more EV charging stations. Okay, that's great. So we have 5 this year. Next year we have 10, and so forth and so on. So that's a measurement. Bicycle parking. Right now we have a smattering of bike racks in some of our commercial, in Beverly, Washington Road, and there's one in front of Hitchhiker and Luma. But we could probably do better than that. So that would be one metric. But you can see here, there's a number of other ways to be sure that we're doing the best we can to live up to the spirit and intention of this policy. So project selection and criteria, again, using this as, I can't remember the exact word Seth used, but yes, the North Star, thank you. Our North Star Polaris document, while we're looking at various capital improvements, so that we're considering all of these various factors, whether it's public safety and various mobilities, stormwater, all of these sorts of issues, while we're working into that. And then implementation steps, there's a number of points there, but the one I wanted to bring up was really what I think the team considers to be an important next step, is pursuing an active transportation plan.
And just, sorry to steal your thunder, but the reason it's codified that way is that actually comes from language from PennDOT. Complete Streets, the policy and process and approach are the first step. But when we go to seek funding, because funding is always a question, PennDOT's looking for an active transportation plan. The county is looking for these things for grant funding, other funding cycles. There's no new federal formula funding for considerations like this. So even Alcosan has the GROW grant program. We already are doing stormwater. We're undergrounding systems. I used to serve from the Dormont Stormwater Authority, so I know how much those cost. Hence, we're potentially raising a stormwater fee. So you create this active transportation plan, so when we start to dig up a street, hey, this was a priority movement street for X, Y, Z. Let's think of these other considerations and maybe go after a larger funding piece or seek ways to augment our capital budget and our other funding mechanisms. So it brings it under a lens, it codifies something, it gives you something to work for, which we don't have right now at this juncture.
And then general, again, this is language also, just, the purpose of the policy is to assist the commission in evaluating, selecting, and implementing options relative to streets by outlining underlying philosophies, so forth and so on. So, again, the policy, things change, and, there are various factors that need to be considered. As the commission well knows, every budget season and every day, there's competing interests, competing resources, and things of that nature. The overall arching goal is to shoot towards that North Star, but there is language that allows some flexibility moving forward should a policy be adopted. So that's a very quick Cliff Notes version of the policy. That's why I'd like to offer it back for your beach reading or whatever we do in the leaf popping reading, and digest that, because I'm sure you may have additional questions or concerns that we would be happy to address. So, the next steps is an active transportation plan in our mind, should this be adopted. And Seth, you just want to take a second and just what's an active transportation plan?
And we've touched on it a little bit, but it's the nuts and bolts. You know, this process and approach rolls into our plans, rolls into divisions of the municipality, and people begin to consider it. We educate our staff and team and commission on what complete streets are, so you can be conversant in it. But what the active transportation plan does is it creates the nuts and bolts. How do we execute this plan? Just like anything else, how do we begin to implement parts of this policy so we respond in an equitable fashion and a fashion where we aren't doing the whack-a-mole style approach that traffic calming takes right now just because of the circumstances. But then you can see, okay, when somebody comes asking about it, we're already responding to it, and maybe we can let them know where things stand, or we can begin to build a network in a consistent fashion. And maybe those traffic calming requests reduce because we're answering everyone's questions. We're already doing it. But that's what the active transportation plan sets up. Those priorities, you can see it in the Ascend Levo interactive page and map where people are asking for sidewalks a lot of places. Where do those make sense? Where can you build sidewalks everywhere? I'd love to, but it is a costly endeavor and there's a maintenance thing associated. So can you give people a certain distance from a priority movement route or priority sidewalk route? And you begin to go in that fashion. So that's what the active transit plan sets up via network map and suggested pursuits of meeting the vision and intent of this policy. And then I kind of touched on it a little bit, but there's funding mechanisms that will respond to an active transportation plan. So,
and there's funding for active transportation
correct.
plans as well. So that's something, if the commission is desirous of that, you know, and
yep.
depending on where things go.
Specific state ones through Walkworks, and Allegheny County has one as well, which encourages regional, you know, efforts where if we maybe went to Dormont, Castle Shannon, since we're kind of those red line communities, we on the Ascend Levo, you're seeing Mount Lebanon Boulevard call for a sidewalk. Well, a lot of that's in Castle Shannon, but how can we work together and make these connections people already want to make? They ask for grocery stores within Mount Lebanon. We have 4 or 3 within the borders, and maybe a 4th that
Shopping Center, Giant Eagle, Fresh
Market, and Coons is just across. So
yeah, they're on the edges.
But that's what it sets up. And we also have great consultants on board with the comp plan. This is something where you can say, hey, we've already knocked something off your list. What do you think that we have this now, and begin to kind of take some feedback on what that means for the community.
Gentlemen, I obviously, as you know, I'd love to keep this conversation going, but we only have so much time. The work that you guys have done has been absolutely phenomenal. And I definitely encourage commissioners to read the policy and ask questions, propose changes. We will vote on this year. I am sticking that flag in the sand. There isn't a date yet, but we will be voting on this. Yes, and obviously I would look forward to everybody's full-fledged support, but I know that we need to get there. So first step or next step is for us to read this in detail and make sure we're either comfortable with it or proposing changes. I do agree 100% that there is funding behind this. This is step one, right? This is a policy. This is not, digging anything up. This is not changing funding. This is about establishing the North Star that sets us on a path that gives staff the tools necessary to start making decisions in different ways. So whether it's public works or it's public safety, thinking about how equipment moves or how pedestrians move, or anything in between, this is a framework within which we can start to think differently and approach these challenges systematically, which is really important, long term. So again, thank you, gentlemen. Truly appreciate all the work you're doing in socializing this and bringing this together, and obviously more to come.
Commissioner, if I may, before we jump off, Tony, you see by my scribbles and notes here, I was doing some reading, fly specking. Call it semantics, but as I was reading through this and seeing a lot of, shall do, shall adhere, that it felt more mandated action than guidance, spirits, and North Star. Maybe that's just being all the legalese here, but I don't see a lot of it possible, and that's one thing. That was just a concern I had going through this. Shall require, must support. You know, it felt a little heavy-handed. And that was just my reading of the legalese here. And so that was just my takeaway, that I just wanted to make sure there's still, you know, there's this nice general section at the back saying, ignore the previous night's action.
That's right.
That's a little, maybe you have a few more if possibles and stuff earlier on. But that was my takeaway from this analysis.
I always like the shall, but then there's a get out of jail free card. Right. My experience is that that's how policies are best written. There at the end, there's always the, you know, whether it's the manager or 4/5 vote of the commission or whatever it might be, we can always get out of it. Right? Again, a policy, you know, isn't set in stone, nor should they be. But you also don't want, you know, to create too many holes. Otherwise, it's a sieve and not a funnel. Right. So I think there's a balance to be struck there.
Anyway, that's my thoughts.
I like it. I'm going to take some time with it. But I understand you want to move it forward. So can you give us a deadline, like either when it's going to be back on public discussion or how to give feedback?
Well, I would say that I think Eric is probably, well, I don't know. I'll defer to Keith and Eric in terms of how you'd like to facilitate questions, comments, feedback.
Yeah, you have 5 meetings left this year. So that's your window. And as far as facilitating comments, feedback, I would recommend that Eric put that out there as a shared doc.
Yeah.
So that we can all work on one document, see whose comments are where, et cetera. And we can talk about, you know, how wide that net gets cast in terms of, you know, public safety and public works and those kind of things. But I won't belabor this conversation.
Plus one of those 5 meetings are selecting a new commissioner. So that we'll chew up some time with that discussion session whenever that happens.
All right. How about if we just say, yeah, all comments, suggestions, feedback are completed by the end of October.
Cool. We have a month and you'll share the document like tomorrow. So we'll have a nice month and you'll send out like weekly reminders, or somebody will send out weekly reminders. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
You're welcome.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you again. All right. Next up, we have brick streets. More streets. Our planner, Ian McMeans, is going to give us an update on our ongoing discussions. They've done some great work in terms of kind of taking our initial goals around the miles and putting it to a map and putting numbers against it and specific segments, which I think is going to be helpful in moving this discussion forward. So take it away, gentlemen.
This will be I had a joke. Complete brick streets with traffic calming. Is that what we're doing here?
Thank you, Commissioner Flynn, and Matt Bagley from Gateway Engineers is with us also tonight. Mr. Bagley was very instrumental in kind of helping put all of this together, including the online map, which I think is a very useful tool, and we'll get to that in a minute. So following up, we had a discussion session on July 26th, where staff received some direction from the commission related to the 9.85 miles of brick streets that we have on the whole. The commission's direction coming out of that meeting was to start drafting a policy and to come back with a staff recommendation on which streets to preserve as brick, which ones to replace with asphalt, kind of with the specific look at slope, the historic district, the type of street that it is, whether it's an alleyway or a local street or a collector street or an arterial street. So, cul-de-sac dead ends, and then some others for further consideration. So, we took that direction from the commission, looked at those streets with steep slopes, looked at those streets that are alleyways, looked at those, that are within the historic district, and came up with our initial list of recommendations for, for which streets to preserve as brick and which streets to, further consider and which streets to replace with asphalt. So in total of the 9.85 miles of brick street in Mount Lebanon, we have about 7.5, give or take, you know, that staff is saying, you know, based on the commission direction to preserve as brick, sorry, you know, another approximate mile for further consideration, and then about 1.25 miles, like 1.25 miles, that based on the slope, based on the type of street that it is, like there's a couple alleyways in here, you know, to replace those with asphalt. So, you know, we have the map here, we can zoom in on certain locations. So on the map, the blues are the preserves, the reds are the replaced with asphalt, and then the yellows are the ones for further consideration. You know, we broke down the further consideration ones into 3 categories. So some of them were just steep streets that don't connect to anything, but we're kind of like right on that borderline of steepness. Some of them were steep streets that connect to other streets that are brick. So, you know, there's one section down here on Connecting Road that you can see my cursors on, that's in an entire neighborhood of brick streets. But that little section of connecting there, you know, exceeds the steepness that we had set up. So we said, okay, you know, staff's recommending, because it connects, we should probably keep this as brick, but we wanted to have that recognition that it is above that threshold we established for steepness. Some other sections, there's some dead end sections of a few streets. There's a few cul-de-sacs that we're saying, hey, you know, these are dead end sections. You know, you may want to keep them. You may want to consider replacing them with asphalt. They're very, you know, low travel, but those are the ones that, you know, staff, when we looked at this, kind of said, okay, these don't really necessarily meet the threshold of being an alley or being a steep street, but they don't really connect to anything, and they're, you know, dead end cul-de-sacs.
And can I ask, what's the thought process between a dead end being not a preserve?
So I think the only, let me look here.
Like, yeah, why just would that make it kind of lean towards not keep it if it's a dead end street?
Craig Court would be more.
Yeah, Craig Court's a cul-de-sac,
Okay.
not necessarily a
Or
dead
a
end.
cul-de-sac, I guess. Let's call it
Yeah,
cul-de-sac.
Craig Court has a steep
Uh-huh.
incline to get up to it, and then the cul-de-sac is sloped as well.
Okay.
And it's
Um,
relatively isolated, which is fairly flat.
Mhm.
Yeah, like, yeah, I see a couple yellows up there, like that are just cul-de-sacs, and I wondered, is it, because you think there's traffic's already kind of calm because it's a dead end cul-de-sac, or is it?
I think it was just, it was more along the lines of that cul-de-sac, and more also if it's isolated from
Other areas?
other areas
I
as
see.
well. So
Okay.
like Craig Court is a perfect example of that, because it is kind of isolated a little bit off.
Zoom in on that, yeah.
There.
Okay,
There's
Yeah.
nothing else around it.
I see.
Ross Way is an alley here. so that
Ross Way is
was-
an alley there that is,
But this is pretty steep coming up the hill,
Okay.
into the cul-de-sac. And,
cul-de-sac.
you know, I think from.
And that road has actually come up on the reconstruction list in the last couple of years, but we've
Not sure, not knowing what to do because it's brick and we're not
just
touching
not
brick.
done
Yeah.
anything with it at this point. So that would be one that, due to its location, due to its relative separation from anything around it that is brick within the neighborhood, it was kind of that dead end cul-de-sac. I guess I think of dead end almost like cul-de-sac.
Yeah, me
as
too.
well.
Yeah, I just didn't know that why dead end would matter, but yeah, and now I kind of.
Yeah, the other, hold on, I zoomed out too far. The other dead end I'll mention is this one on Academy Place,
Okay.
which really, once again, doesn't connect to anything. Salem Drive coming up through here is all asphalt.
Yeah,
And it's just this little leg, which I don't even, I guess, does this house have a driveway coming off of it?
It does
But-
have, yeah.
Yeah, this house has a driveway coming off of it, but,
Yeah.
you know, it's,
Some of them seem like forgotten pieces of brick
Yeah.
over the course
Yeah.
of time, like the main road was completed and then.
right, because there's the right of way through here that was never actually completed or developed, so it's
Oh.
basically a paper street. So it was built out to just the one block as brick and then just kind of left there. So that was one we said, okay, you know, it's steep, it's just, you know, serves 2 houses, things like that. But then, you know, some of the other ones, like Commissioner Silverman mentioned, Martha, you know, we put that on our further consideration list because I know that from talking to the people that live on Martha, they love having a brick street there. So, you know, that was one where staff was kind of like, it's flat, it's in the historic district, but, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, when you're looking at how much bang for your buck are you getting, yeah, it's down a little, you know, it's one of those ones where you're only serving a couple houses and, you know, are you investing? Because as we've established with our, you know, previous memos and things, there's a significantly higher cost to replace with brick than there is to replace with asphalt. So, you know, at that point, there's some consideration for if it's disconnected from other streets, if it's, you know, Martha's right here. If it's disconnected from other streets, if it's, you know, relatively low impact, you know, how much money does the commission want to invest? And that's a financial decision for the commission to make. Whereas like this section of connecting road is part of this whole network of brick streets, you know, back through the whole neighborhood here. Actually, interestingly enough, if you look back at like the old Mount Lebanon map from like 1930 something, this is the kind of limits of the streets that were built at that point. And then the next section of main entrance was built at a different point in time. But nevertheless, that's just an aside from the planner.
Yeah, so
Ian loves those.
the 4 streets that are on that dead end cul-de-sac, those are the Martha, the Birch, all those ones are kind of like just somewhat isolated off by themselves.
And the Birch section was just from Hill to the dead end.
Yeah,
it wasn't because the rest of Birch is pretty flat, but it was just the question of the Hill to the dead end section. And that was also a question of Hill is a steep street. We've already done half of it in asphalt. Do we want to keep the other half as brick? It is steep. Do we want to convert it to asphalt? You know, Adeline and Birch are both brick as well. So there is some interconnectivity there. So that was kind of a, you know, how do you make a consideration on a neighborhood scale there of, you know, do you keep it? Do you replace it? So that's kind of an open question that, you know, for further consideration by the commission. And Mr. Bagley also put together a fairly lengthy presentation that runs a bunch of numbers and financial analyses on all this stuff. But we obviously don't have time for that tonight. We're happy to, you know, pass it on to the commission and, you know, come back and discuss it further at a future meeting. But, you know, this was a deliverable that the commission asked for out of the last public discussion session in July, was to come back and the list of streets based on the criteria that the commission had established. So this was our, you know, first pass at that list of streets.
I have to say that this has been really helpful for me. I think, you know, frankly, your first pass was smaller than I anticipated. The blue, what you said, it was like 7 something miles.
7.5, yeah.
7.5. Right, and the orange is how much?
About one.
About one.
Which is fantastic, right? That gives us a sense of the range we're working in, right? In terms of kind of committing to this is a long-term program. Obviously, there's, you know, some details here that, you know, I think we need to kind of dig into and obviously have some discussions on. And I think each commissioner is going to look in their own ward and probably be a, you know, dig in the weeds and really, you know, make sure they're comfortable with it. But I think overall, I'm much more comfortable with this now, looking at this than I was, you know, just with the numbers, knowing that we needed to start with just the numbers to get a sense of scale and general price tag that we're thinking about. But I think this is a nice step. And for me, as it stands, my ward, I'm good with keeping the blues and everything else can go. But yeah, I don't have as much, some of these, you know, yeah, so some of these are, these questions obviously are in Ward 1 and 3 and 2 and 5 or 4. So yeah, I think this is fantastic. Yeah. Do you guys have questions?
Just you mentioned that there's a report.
So we put together a brief PowerPoint presentation just in case some questions came up about some costs under the current budget scenario that we are under today, the 2.1 million. And then also looking ahead, if we were to increase that funding by $1 million, all with the presumption that the commission were to agree that the replaced streets were going to be replaced, and we didn't really do anything with the orange streets at this point. So there is some more work to be done.
Okay.
But it's just the first go around with a couple different options of current funding. There was an additional $1 million of funding, but ultimately we'd be looking for some additional direction from the commission on how we want to refine those numbers a little bit further on what's in the bucket that we want to keep and what isn't. So, but that being said, at the very end, it comes down to, under our current funding, if we were to replace the brick streets that are recommended here, if you go to the very left, that's that one here. Yeah. So we have two different budget scenarios. This one, the blue is the current funding. It shows that we're currently at a 70. What is that? 79. And once again, based on the direction of the commission from the last meeting, we looked at the overall network, not just any one individual category of streets. So this is the overall network of streets. We would go from a 79 to a 59. So basically it's 1 point a year that we would decrease under the current funding. If we were to add $1 million, and once again, there's assumptions throughout we can refine, we would go from basically an 80 in 2023, assuming we added $1 million next year, down to a 63, which is about a 0.85 point per year decrease. There's some things that we would want to include, and it's beyond the discussion here. I think over time, probably in about 5-10 years, we're going to want to add more to the mill and overlay program, because what's happening is these reconstruction budgets, because that's where the brick falls in, the reconstruction budget isn't used for like the mill and overlay. And I think that we just assumed a flat 400,000 for mill and overlay over the years. I think once what starts dragging this number down in the future is all the reconstruction streets are going to start needing that treatment of the mill and overlay at a much less cost. So we can run those analyses too if we want to start building a bigger mill and overlay fund. But once again, I just wanted to give a quick overview of what happens. And then one slide here, with this budget at the end of the program at 2042, the commission had mentioned about getting the bricks from where they are today up to about a 70. Yeah. This would, as you look in both scenarios, it gets it to about a 68 and change in each case. So it gets it to that, gets the brick streets that if we were to preserve to that about 70 range. And then it shows what happens to the other streets as well. But I'll provide this, or actually I provided to Ian already, so we can issue the slide package to the commission. Thank you. Yeah.
One other question, refresh me, Ian or Keith, as the proposed policy stands, we had originally talked about having an alternate program where residents could select to have brick if it wasn't part of the municipality's plan. Have we retained that in the policy as we've tried to move it forward?
I was kind of talking through that with Phil Weiss, getting some legal input on that, because I had some outstanding legal questions on kind of functionally how that would work and how that would get written into a policy, and just how it would, long-term implications. And, if you write it as residents have to pay for it, are you adversely impacting your less well-off residents by telling them they have to pay for their brick streets versus your more well-off residents that may be able to afford it more? Are you basically creating an economic inequity by saying, oh, well, you're wealthy enough to afford your brick street so you can keep it, but you residents over here on this street, you're not, so you're going to lose it. So I was working through some of that stuff with Phil.
Okay, so it's still being worked through as to whether the concept makes sense and can be applied. Because I think, examples, and not to pick on Martha, but I think Martha is an interesting example of, it's an interesting, street. I think I understand why people would want it to be brick. having lived over there. But it might fall out of the scope of, our effort, but, would love to see, people have the option to, say, well, we want to preserve it. And do they have a mechanism to do that?
Okay, so you're working on that.
Working on it with Phil, yeah.
Yeah, and then answer to 5 times, back to a slide that you had a 5-year.
We kind of breeze through some of these.
Yes. That's the one.
Yeah, so those are 5-year increments across the bottom. Or
yeah, here, I'll zoom in a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, there we go. So that's a little better. So that goes from 23 to 42. So
and the one thing, just
okay, so it's possible is to go kind of and then flatten those, where this has got a dropping 1 point per year out to 2042. We said, well, we're going to go down 1 point per year until, let's say, 2033. At that point, then we want to have it level off. Obviously that's to affect what numbers are needed for street repair, but the idea goes, doesn't have all the way go down.
That's right.
if you want to hold a 70, or if you want to hold something.
We know right now we are enjoying the going sort. I hate to say enjoying if you live in a street that's just went through this, but the point is that as we talk about like project like Wood Haven, where part of that's going to pay for by the utility, how do we leverage that project with our overall road budget? It will last forever because people still drive the streets decay. Maybe we can pick up a little bit of that and leverage it for costs on the streets.
And one other thing I'll just mention real quickly is that historically what we found is if we inspect the roads this assumes just the degradation curves. Our roads are typically built better than the average. So usually when we do an inspection, we get a bump of a few points. Okay. So even at 5 or 10 years, if we did another inspection, I would imagine that we would get a little bit of a bump.
Okay.
So this is, like I said, I think this is a worst case scenario. Not.
I like to look at the worst case scenario and then kind of get good. Talk about the better thing. Well, I have like overall kind of global feedback. I was looking for us to preserve 90% of our brick streets at 9.85, now closer to 8.85 or 8.9. This proposal with the blue keeps about 85% of our brick streets. So not quite 90. I could live with that, I think. I know it's very expensive and that's okay. I could get behind just the blue, but when we add on the yellow, then we're really only preserving 75% of our brick streets, and that's where I get less comfortable moving forward. So not talking about specific streets, but does that check out?
Well, I think if the blue or the 7.5 miles, and then the kind of the unknown, that extra mile is what we're talking about. Is what we're talking about.
So I would tentatively support the blue, but it's a little less than I was hoping, because initially we kind of threw around keeping 9 at 9.85, or maybe a little bit less than that, but I know it's expensive.
I think my request there would be, if we wanted to maintain the PCI score network-wide at 70%, or it said 70, what's the price differential between only keeping blue and adding the orange?
Yeah, that'd be a great way to look at
it. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yes.
Yeah. So just what's the price differential to maintain the 70 over the 20-year period? And again, I would just say annualize that number.
And really within those, yellow, orange, whatever color you want to call them, streets, in my memo, I kind of broken them out into, certain steep slopes that we thought should be preserved, like the, that section of connecting I had mentioned, the section of Hoodridge Drive down here that connects between the brick on Hoodridge and, the other brick, the Rockwood down there. Yeah, okay. The brick on Hoodridge and the brick on Rockwood, that section, it's steep, but it makes no sense to replace it with asphalt because it's connecting. It would just look awkward from a neighborhood standpoint. That section of connecting, same idea. So really there was 9 street segments that were kind of that in between that up in the air. Those, steep ones for further consideration, and then those couple like cul-de-sac dead ends that we mentioned. The dead end of Beverly, the dead end of Birch, the little section of Iroquois down by the bottom that has asphalt on both sides of it. It's just one little section of brick. And then the dead end of Martha were the 4 cul-de-sacs, and then the 5 steep slopes for further consideration was that section of Hilf I mentioned, section of McCully, Nakoma, partial section on Royce, and Savannah.
Nakoma has like 2 steep sections.
Yeah.
Either end of the street.
Yeah.
I hate to cut this short, but we are at 8 o'clock.
Okay. So those were really, I'll just summarize. Those were really the 9, those 9 that I just said were really the sort of wiggle room, I'll say, that, based on my memo, kind of what, and the commission, my memo was based on the commission direction from July, that we were kind of recommending like 8 miles between regular preserve as brick and then those other streets, 8 miles, give or take, to preserve.
Well, I thought it was 7.5.
So here, hold on, let me go back to
the steep slopes to preserve. It's 0.46 miles. So we're, even though they're steep, we're saying that they should be preserved.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just because they are linked to a whole neighborhood of brick.
Yeah. So it was
it's really that 7.46 plus 0.46 that we're saying is the blue in essence.
here. It's
7.88 if I've done the math right.
Yeah. So here, there's the numbers that. This preserved steep slope, this one actually appears as yellow on the map also. So that was why we said the 7.46 was preserved as brick. This additional 0.46, give or take 0.4, the steep slopes that we said to preserve. And then the 1.4 based on the commission direction of steep slopes, alleys, things like that, was the 1.24. So then it really just leaves that 0.6, 0.7
to talk
about.
Later.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. That makes me even better. So more like 7.9. Cool.
Awesome.
For the lower number, sorry.
I know. That's our discussion. That's perfect. That's where we'll be.
Yes.
And
Next time.
at some point, I'm going to need clarification in terms of, Andrew, when you talk about PCI of 70, what's the cost annualized? Is that a PCI annually for all streets or just specifically for?
No, all streets. I mean, if we think about it from a network perspective, what's the cost differential if we just, if we make this incremental change on the orange or just preserve the blue?
Okay, because I want to be able to try to tie this in or pull this in with our budget conversation.
Perfect.
So again, I'm just trying to get to.
Yeah, because ultimately what I'm trying to do is just say, look, I want to treat streets as streets, right? There are brick streets that are treated specially. We understand that. We've made that determination. But I'm looking at a street budget, period. I'm not looking at a brick budget and a asphalt budget, right? It's streets. What's the total number?
I termed it as,
yeah.
So streets in the municipality, regardless of whether they're asphalt, brick, or concrete, we want to maintain a PCI of 70. What's the annualized cost to be able to do that?
Right. Yeah. And if we just do the blue, or if we do the blue and the orange, right?
Yeah.
Because that ultimately we're talking about capacity, right? So what's it going to take to maintain the capacity at, again, I picked 70 as a number, right? We can debate that later, but I think that gives us a shared sense of this is what it would take.
I like it.
And I think Gateway can probably give us the cost figure for 70, 65, 60, whatever you could sort of.
Right, every scenario.
And then change the years, maybe not just 40.
So we've been doing a 20-year budget. Is that good as far as the timeline is concerned? Yep.
All right.
Helpful. Thank you so much for doing this work.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I will see you at commission.
Yes, sir.
Momentarily. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.